When did your parents damage you beyond repair? I cried when the garage door opened because that's when I knew what my dad would do to my baby brother. Inside the garage, he kept his tools hanging on the wall like a display. Leather belts arranged by thickness, extension cords wrapped perfectly, and a wooden paddle he'd made, still stained with red and brown spots. But the worst thing in that garage wasn't the tools. My father had one rule that neither of us dared to break. His one rule was that nobody was allowed to touch the metal chest in the corner. It sat in a corner of the garage for years, never moved with actual cobwebs on it. But when I was 8 and Joel was 6, Dad caught us looking at the chest. We weren't even touching it, just standing near it, wondering what was inside. His face turned purple, and he grabbed the thickest belt from the wall. "You think rules don't apply to you?" he screamed, and we tried to run away, but he locked us in. The beating lasted 20 minutes and left bruises that we had to hide from school and our friends so they didn't call CPS. After that, we stayed far away from the chest, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. What was so important that he'd rage like an ape just because we looked at it? Joel thought it had body parts in it, which gave him nightmares for months. The discipline sessions got worse as we got older. If we got anything below a B on our report cards, it meant an hour of screaming in the garage. If we talked back or forgot a chore, the tools came out. Just to make sure we really learned our lesson, our dad would spray scrubbing bubbles on the wounds so they'd sizzle. Mom would turn up the TV volume and pretend nothing was happening. She'd make dinner while we screamed and act surprised at the bruises later, but she never made an attempt to stop him. By the time I turned 15, I'd gotten good at avoiding Dad's triggers, but Joel wasn't as lucky. He had ADH and couldn't sit still in class or at home, which Dad saw as disrespect. One night, Joel spilled juice on Dad's work papers by accident. I watched Dad's eyes turn red as he stood up from the table and slammed his hand down. Garage. Now, that session was different. Dad used everything on the wall that night. He told him, "I'm gonna beat the ADH out of you. You'll have no choice but to stay still." Joel passed out twice, and Dad just dumped buckets of cold water on him to wake him up. I stood outside the door listening to my little brother beg for mercy, while Mom vacuumed the living room like nothing was wrong. Something inside me broke that night. If no one was going to defend us, we weren't gonna stick around. I got a job at the grocery store and hid money in a sock in my room. I researched bus routes in cities where 2 teenage boys could disappear, but I needed more money than minimum wage could give me. That's when I started thinking about the chest again. The opportunity came 6 months later, when Dad went on a weekend-long hunting trip to strengthen his manhood. Mom was working a night shift at the hospital and wouldn't be back until morning. I shook Joel awake at midnight and told him to pack a bag. "We're leaving tonight." His eyes got huge, but he didn't ask questions. He'd learned not to ask questions. We crept down to the garage with flashlights. My hands were shaking as I pulled the tarp off the chest. The red letters seemed to glow in the dark. "Do not open." I found a crowbar on Dad's tool wall and wedged it under the lock. It took 3 tries before the metal snapped. Inside the chest was nothing like what I'd imagined. There were stacks of $100 bills wrapped in rubber bands. Underneath the money was a black hand Glock and a box of bullets. At the very bottom were photos of Dad as a kid with bruises all over his body, and a man who looked like an older, meaner version of him. I pieced 2 and 2 together. That was his father. I grabbed all the money and stuffed it in my backpack. Joel saw the gun and reached for it, but I slapped his hand away. "We're not like him," I said. "We left everything else exactly how we found it, except for the broken lock." Let him wonder who'd been in his precious chest. The train station was empty at 3 in the morning. I bought 2 tickets to Seattle with cash while Joel sat on a bench hugging his backpack. We had enough money to start over and disappear completely. As the bus pulled away, I didn't look back at our town. I just held Joel's hand and promised him things would be better. We found out what happened to Dad 3 months later. My aunt called the crappy motel where we were staying. She said Dad had gone into the garage one night and never came out. After a couple of hours of screaming, there was a loud bang that woke up everyone. Except Mom found him the next morning with a Glock in his hand, and his brains splattered all over the wall and his precious belts. He'd left a note that just said, "I failed. I couldn't break the cycle." Joel and I are doing okay now. We both go to therapy and have real jobs.